Did you know that 2 United States presidents had epilepsy? First off, James Madison was the fourth president of the USA, serving from 1809 to 1817, and the guy really made his mark on the country. He has a university named after him, a capital named after him, a town in over half the United States and almost as many counties, as well as a nice little square garden. For over a century, from 1861 to 1969, he was the face of the $5,000 bill. And he was so significant to American history that he became one of the main supporting roles in the Tony Award-winning Hamilton. Not to be confused with Hercules Mulligan. It takes a lot to make that sort of impression on society. Madison was wary and even fearful of the effects of his seizures, saying he viewed himself as a constitutional liability to sudden attacks, somewhat resembling epilepsy, and suspending the intellectual functions. But he was so vital to the young country, he was encouraged to push his way through. Of course, epilepsy wasn't his only unique challenge. You're probably not going to hear about James Madison without hearing that he was the shortest president in U.S. history. He stood at 5 foot 4 inches and about 100 pounds, which, for reference, would put him right here in NBA history. In addition to seizures, he also had to deal with a cocktail of chronic conditions up to and including arthritis, jaundice, remittent fevers, persistent vomiting, persistent diarrhea, liver disease, and he probably had a nasty paper cut at some point. Madison was often looked at as weak because of his ailment's small stature and quiet demeanor, but nevertheless, he was a legendary hard worker. He graduated from Princeton in just 2 years instead of 4, and is credited as being the university's first graduate student. He was a Virginia delegate to the Constitutional Convention and more or less brought the whole document together, including writing out the first 10 amendments, aka the Bill of Rights. This earned him the nickname of the Father of the Constitution, though for the sake of clarity, there are probably spots in the document where he really could have used some different punctuation. After the Constitutional Convention, he served Virginia in the House of Reps for almost a decade. He then served as Jefferson's Secretary of State before taking over the presidency himself in 1809. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one of the best moves any president's ever made, which was forming a power couple with Dolly Madison to define the role of First Lady of the United States. He was the president, but she set the precedent for hospitable diplomacy. James Madison's time as president could be called somewhat uneventful, provided you ignore the War of 1812, which actually lasted from 1812 to 1815, the taking of Washington, D.C., and westward expansion into Native American territory. Madison's epilepsy and parade of other health issues persisted, but because of the public stigma, he instead referred to a seizure as an experience. Madison lived to the age of 85, but he always had seizures, saying, "They continued throughout my life with prolonged intensity." Despite facing semi-regular moderate seizures, though, Madison is an example of conquering issues to achieve and lead at the highest level. And he wasn't the only one. Theodore "Don't Call Me Teddy" Roosevelt was the 26th president of the USA, serving from 1901 to 1909. In multiple nonpartisan surveys of historians to make a list of the greatest American presidents, he's a solid number 4 behind only a distant relative who presided more than any other president, the guy who started it all, and the guy who took down slavery in the US. If you were to make a Mount Rushmore of American presidents, he'd be, okay, well, I guess he's already on there. What's less known is the fact that TR suffered from seizures his whole life, as well as suffering from the more publicized asthma and vision issues. Despite these things, he accomplished quite a bit. Here's a brief sample. He became a total beefcake on the boxing team at Harvard University, where he graduated near the top of his class. He then served as the New York City Police Commissioner, then the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, until he resigned that to lead his own military unit, the Rough Riders. He was one of the most effective environmentalists in history. He wrote and published 47 books. He had a brief stint as the governor of New York, before taking an even briefer stint as the U.S. vice president, until William McKinley's seat as president was suddenly vacated. He took down the monopoly of J.D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, then kept American industry alive by negotiating a labor agreement between J.P. Morgan and the workers that ran his company. He once gave an 84-minute speech after being shot in the chest, and he had a really cute terrier breed named after him. And I want to remind you again, this is all while being susceptible to epileptic seizures. He became so popular and influential that the campaign swag created to promote his love of nature are still commonly known as teddy bears. As president, Roosevelt championed the National Antiquities Act, which, among other things, paved the way for the creation of the National Park Service. In other words, he's the reason the Grand Canyon looks like this, and not like this. That said, he's also the reason this doesn't look like this. He's one of the most popular political figures in U.S. history, and again, accomplished all of it despite suffering from seizures his whole life. So why isn't his epilepsy more widely known? Well, in the mid-19th to mid-20th centuries in particular, seizures were looked at as a cursed condition. Before the introduction and breakthrough of medications and other treatments, it was common practice in the eugenics era to more or less remove people with epilepsy from society by placing them in asylums, restricting them from education and employment, and even performing forced sterilization. In other words, it's not a fact you wanted getting out about you. Theodore's form of epilepsy also affected his brother Elliot, who had actually died of a seizure at the age of 34. President Roosevelt was able to keep his own epilepsy from the public while in office and work past his complications, though. His vision and asthmatic issues were enough to tell a similar personal character story to the public without a social stigma of epilepsy. These two men were among the most influential in history, proving that seizures aren't an automatic disqualification from changing the world. For more videos with facts, perspectives, and personal updates, please subscribe to Jeff on the Brain on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Thanks for watching, and take care.